everyone! So today I want to teach you about Task 1 structure. As you might know, structure counts 25% of your writing score. So it's very important to get right. So let's get started. So you might know that you have to write 150 words in 20 minutes for Task 1. 180 to 190 words is a good number to aim for, but please don't write more than 200 words. Otherwise, it's no longer a summary. And the main instruction word is to summarize the data. You always need to write 4 paragraphs for Task 1, but no conclusion, please. Not like in Task 2. These are all the types of graphs and charts, etc. that you need to practice writing about for Task 1. Just remember, the goal is to summarize the data. Don't include your opinion. How to manage your time in Task 1. Read the question and study the diagram for roughly 2 minutes. And then analyze the diagram to identify 2 to 3 major interesting trends for a maximum of 2 minutes. Altogether, you should not spend more than 4 minutes understanding the graph and its trends. The more graphs you look at and write about and practice writing for, the quicker this will become for you. You then have roughly 14 minutes to write the actual text, and hopefully you should have 2 minutes left over at the end for proofreading, checking for errors. So the first paragraph in Task 1 is your single sentence introduction. Okay. Then you have what some people call the overview paragraph or the summary paragraph. I like to call it the overall paragraph because it begins with the word overall. And basically this paragraph summarizes 2 or 3 interesting trends. Now what I find interesting might be different from what you find interesting, and that's okay. Together we'll practice identifying the most interesting trends. Then in body paragraph 1, you need to summarize half of the data, and in body paragraph 2, summarize the other half of the data. So let's look at an example. Here we have a line graph. The topic reads, the graph below gives information from a 2008 report about the consumption of energy in the USA since 1980, with projections until 2030. So it's about the past and the future. Now, when I write my single sentence introduction, I'm going to label what kind of graph it is. I will change the verb gives to something else, like shows. I will change the way that the dates are described. They said since 1980 with projections until 2030. I'm going to change that to from 1980 to 2008 with projected use until 2030. So slightly different wording. Because I don't want to keep repeating the unit of measurement throughout my text, I'm going to also mention it in the introduction. However, if it's an easy unit of measurement like American dollars, then you don't need to mention this here. It's easy to simply put the dollar sign in your body paragraphs. Okay, in your overall paragraph, which begins with the word overall, you need to give me 2 or 3 interesting trends. But please, don't use any numbers in this paragraph. Dates are fine though. Okay, so in this particular line graph, I was lucky in that the top 3 lines all followed the same direction, more or less, and they were the 3 highest lines, and they all happened to be fossil fuels. So I decided to group them together as my first trend. Okay, I'm going to talk about this trend using words only, no numbers. Dates are fine though, although I've chosen not to use dates. For trend number 2, again, I was lucky that nuclear, solar, wind, and hydropower All these lines followed a similar shape. They were all low. So I grouped them together and said one trend about nuclear and renewable energy. So 2 sentences in total. Now, you're not always so lucky that you're able to group these lines together. Sometimes the lines are very different from each other. In which case, just choose any 2 lines. I normally recommend saying something about one line that increased the most and another line that decreased the most. For me, that's what's most interesting. Okay, we'll talk about how to choose the best trends later. But for now, let's look at what we put in body paragraph 1. As you can see, I've spoken about all the yellow categories, so all the fossil fuels. And I've included in every single sentence a combination of a date and data, date and data, date and data. Okay, so you need to cover half of the categories in body paragraph 1, and whatever's left, you need to talk about in the remaining body paragraph 2. Okay, again, giving the date and data in every single sentence. Okay, by the end of your text, you need to have spoken about all 6 categories. In this case, energy types. Just because you don't like nuclear does not mean that you can ignore talking about it. Okay, if you ignore any of the categories, you get a low score for task response. Okay, so here we go into more detail about what goes inside the introduction. I've already explained this to you. Okay, all of these resources you will be able to download after the video to revise on your own before completing a quiz. All right, so the overall paragraph, we've already spoken about the fact that you need to mention 2 to 3 important trends. These can be things like what increased, what decreased, what peaked, what dipped, what remained stable over time. Okay, but the most important thing is that you should just highlight the trend. Please don't analyze why the trend happens. Okay. When it comes to giving dates in your overall paragraph, actual dates are fine. When it comes to times of the day, please do not be too exact. Rather just mention words like morning, evening, afternoon, etc. Again, I'm looking for words that describe changes in this paragraph and adjectives to describe the type of change. Highest, lowest, etc. Okay. Before I start writing, I need to look at the dates in the graph to determine the correct tense to use throughout. In this particular line graph, I've got a combination of past, present, and future. So I'm going to need to use 3 different tenses. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, I've already spoken about this with you. Okay. Many students ask me, do I need to compare everything? The answer is no. Okay. Compare data across categories where possible. Sometimes the lines are, or the categories are too similar, in which case there's nothing to compare. So it depends on how similar or different your categories are. And it depends on how much time you have and how many words you still need to write. So compare where possible, but not every sentence has to be a comparison. Okay. Obviously, one of your body paragraphs will be a little bit longer than the other because you don't always have an even number of categories to discuss. Sometimes there are 5 categories, in which case You'll talk about 3 in body paragraph 1 and 2 in body paragraph 2. Should you talk about all the dates in the graph? Absolutely not. There's no time for that. Okay. So in this particular line graph, I recommend talking about the starting date, 1980. Something interesting in the middle where there was an inflection point or a peak or a dip, and its end point, so that we can track, has the line increased over time, has it decreased over time, or has it remained stable? All the other dates, don't worry about discussing. There's no time or space for that in your text. Remember, this is a summary. Okay, we've spoken about that. Now, if there are too many categories or numbers, especially in tables, see if you can group them based on similarities and say one thing about the group using a range. Think of it like a shortcut. Okay, for example, if we've got a big table comparing men and women with lots of data, you can mention 3 activities that they both do: drinking, doing sport, and sitting around. You can discuss both genders all in one sentence by using the following phrase, ranging between 0 and 9%. For example, both genders spend little time on drinking, doing sport, and sitting around, with percentages ranging between 0 and 9%. This helped me to avoid listing the percentages for men and for women for each of those 3 categories. That would have been 6 percentages. That would have taken up a lot more time and space. This is a shortcut. Do not do it in every sentence, but when you've got a table with too much data that you need to cover, too many activities you need to mention, this is very helpful. There's another example for you to read later. You need to use some linking phrases between your sentences to create a nice flow between your ideas, but the writing rubric actually warns you, please do not use these in every sentence. Okay, every second sentence is fine. Examples of these linking structures include phrases like in contrast, similarly, while, on the other hand. These are useful for comparison and for introducing the next idea. Okay, so the structure we use for a flowchart and a map is slightly different. And I'm going to show you this in the next video. Many students ask me, so how do I decide what to talk about in body paragraph 1 compared to body paragraph 2? There are 2 options, right? If you get a graph like this one, where you have a nice division between fossil fuels and renewable energy, then you could decide to talk about fossil fuels in body paragraph 1 and renewable energy in body paragraph 2. I understand that you have already spoken about them in the overall paragraph, but remember that was just a summary of the overall trend. In the body paragraphs, you actually need to give the data. So it might feel like you're repeating yourself, but it's more like you're going into more detail this time. Okay. How do we decide what to talk about in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2? How to structure our ideas? Basically, option A and option B. Option A, you can go into detail about trend number 1 in body paragraph 1. So in this case, fossil fuels. And trend number 2 in body paragraph 2. In this case, renewable energy. Obviously, you're going to go into more detail about each of those trends. So you're going to give the actual date and make any comparisons between those categories. So, for example, here you could compare petrol and oil to coal and compare that to natural gas. Okay, body paragraph 2. Again, you'll go into more detail about the data regarding renewable energy, and you'll compare the different types of renewable energy. So use this when the two main features or trends describe different trends or categories. For example, renewables versus fossil fuels. Option B. You can combine your two main trends or features into one paragraph when there's an overlap. So you could get all your trends out the way in body paragraph 1 and then use body paragraph 2 to simply cover the remaining more boring categories, any exceptions or extra comparisons. This structure works well when the two main features interact in some way. For example, when one rises while the other falls at the same time, in which case you'll want to talk about them in the same paragraph. Okay, but do not stress about how to structure your body paragraph 1 and 2. As long as by the end you have covered all the categories, you're fine. Okay. There's no right or wrong. It's just about making sure that you cover all the categories by the end of the text. So what kinds of trends can we talk about? Well, it depends on the graph. If the graph has dates, then definitely talk about what changed over time, what increased, what decreased, how intense that change was. You know, did things increase dramatically or increase slightly? You could even talk about what remained the same over time. If, however, your graph or flowchart doesn't have dates, then you'll need to talk about what was the highest, what was the lowest, what was the most, what was the least. This works well for bar charts and pie charts, even tables without dates. Obviously, for flowcharts, though, you need to talk about the stages in the process. Now let's look at example each of the task 1 types together and plan what we would say in the overall paragraph. What are our 2 or 3 interesting trends? Let's also plan what we would talk about in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2. So by the end of the next video, you should have a very clear idea of how to structure any type of task 1. See you in the next one.